You chase wealth, yet it slips through your fingers like dry sand. What if the secret to having everything isn't wanting more, but needing less? Discover the ancient Stoic rules that turn hardship into power, redefine success, and force the universe to hand you exactly what you desire. The sprawling port city of Alexandria smelled of salt, sweat, and crushed ambition. The harbor, normally a bustling artery of the ancient world's commerce, was a graveyard of splintered timber and shredded linen. A freak summer tempest had swept through the Mediterranean the night before, swallowing entirely the merchant fleet of a young, ambitious trader named Elias. Elias stood at the edge of the docks, the violent surf foaming at his sandaled feet. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, mirroring the wreckage of his life's work. Every denarius he owned, every ounce of leverage he had painstakingly built over a decade, was currently resting at the bottom of the sea, feeding the fish. He had prayed, he had strategized, he had worked through the nights, yet the universe had answered his ambition with a crushing, indifferent blow. He fell to his knees in the wet sand, his hands gripping his hair. He was entirely broken. He believed that to manifest wealth, one merely needed to work hard and desire it fiercely enough. The storm had just shattered that illusion. "The sea does not care about your ledgers, boy," a voice rasped from behind him. Elias did not have to turn to know who it was. It was Bion, an old merchant who had long ago traded the chaos of the markets for the quiet discipline of philosophy. Bion walked with a limp, leaning heavily on a cedar cane, a living testament to a life that had seen both the zenith of wealth and the abyss of ruin. "It is gone, Bion," Elias whispered, his voice trembling. "Everything. I willed my success into existence. I visualized the gold. I did everything right, and the gods took it." Bion stepped beside the young man. He did not offer a comforting hand. Stoicism does not trade in the cheap currency of pity. Instead, Bion used the tip of his cedar cane to draw a circle in the wet sand around Elias. "Step one of your new life," Bion commanded, his voice cutting through the sound of the crashing waves. "Rule 1. Draw the line of ultimate control, the dichotomy of control. Most men live their entire lives trying to control the wind," Bion explained, pointing his cane out at the violent grey horizon. "They tie their happiness, their wealth, and their peace of mind to the weather, the markets, the opinions of their competitors, and the whims of emperors. You believed that because you desired wealth, you could command the sea to grant your ships safe passage. You were a fool playing God." Elias looked up, anger flashing through his grief. "So I should desire nothing? I should accept poverty?" "You fundamentally misunderstand how to manifest what you want," Bion replied sharply. "Manifestation is not the art of wishing. It is the art of unyielding execution within the boundaries of reality. Look at the circle I drew around you." Elias looked down at the trench in the sand. "Inside that circle is your mind," Bion said. "Your beliefs, your choices, your work ethic, your character, your resilience. That is your empire. You are the absolute emperor of that domain. The universe cannot touch it unless you open the gates. Outside that circle is everything else: the storm, your sunken ships, your bank accounts, your reputation. If you attach your identity to what is outside the circle, you will always be a victim, crying on the beach. But if you conquer the space inside the circle, the wealth you seek becomes an inevitable byproduct of your discipline. To truly manifest success, the Stoic severs the emotional strings attached to the outcome. Elias had to learn that mourning the ships was a catastrophic waste of the energy he needed to rebuild. The wealthy do not mourn the lost cargo. They immediately begin negotiating for the next one. They operate strictly within their sphere of control. By releasing the frantic need to control the uncontrollable, Elias would suddenly find himself possessing an immense, razor-sharp focus. Elias stood up, stepping carefully out of the circle, wiping the sand from his knees. "The ships are gone," he said, his voice finding a hollow, new-found, steady tone. "I cannot pull them from the depths." "Good," Bion nodded. "Now, look at the harbor." What else did the storm do? Elias squinted. The massive storm surge had ripped apart the northern breakwater. The narrow channel that allowed foreign grain ships to enter Alexandria was completely blocked by debris and the hulks of sunken vessels. Rule 2. The obstacle becomes the gold. Amor fati. "It ruined the port," Elias said bitterly. "No ships can enter. The city will be completely starved of trade for months. The market will stall." "Look closer," Bion urged. "The obstacle in the path becomes the path. What stands in the way becomes the way." You wanted wealth, Elias. You are looking at a tragedy. A Stoic looks at the exact same scene and sees a monopoly. Elias's mind, now unburdened from the grief of his own loss, began to race. He realized Bion was right. The sea trade was dead for the season. That meant the city's massive demand for grain, spices, and textiles could only be met by land routes, the treacherous long desert caravans from the east. No merchant in Alexandria specialized in land trade. They were all sailors, obsessed with the sea. "The overland routes," Elias breathed out, the realization striking him like lightning. "Whoever controls the camels and the desert guides controls the entire market for the next 6 months. Because of the storm, my competitors are paralyzed." "Love your fate," Bion said, a faint smile touching his weathered face. "Amor fati." Do not merely endure the storm, Elias. Welcome it. The storm just wiped out your old business, yes, but it also leveled the playing field and created an absolute necessity for a new one. The universe did not punish you. It handed you a blank slate and paralyzed your rivals with grief. Are you going to weep, or are you going to buy every camel in the province? This is the second Stoic rule of manifestation. True wealth creators do not ask for an easy life. They know that every economic crash, every personal failure, every unforeseen disaster carries within it the seed of an equivalent or greater advantage. The obstacle is not blocking the path to wealth. The obstacle is the raw material from which new wealth is forged. By sunset, Elias had not shed another tear. While the other merchants of Alexandria sat in the taverns, drinking away their sorrows and cursing the gods of the sea, Elias was in the dusty outskirts of the city, signing promissory notes, leveraging the last of his credibility to secure an exclusive contract with the Bedouin desert navigators. The storm had destroyed him, but Stoicism was already rebuilding him into something untouchable. 3 years passed. The desert routes had made Elias richer than the sea ever could have. He had monopolized the eastern caravan trade while the harbor was being rebuilt, and when the port finally reopened, he had enough capital to dominate both land and sea. He lived in a sprawling villa in the wealthy quarter of Alexandria. He wore silk imported from the edge of the world, and his name was spoken with a mixture of reverence and envy. Yet, as the gold piled up in his vaults, a quiet, suffocating rot began to take hold of his spirit. It was the height of summer, and Elias was hosting a lavish banquet. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meats, spilled wine, and the cloying perfumes of patricians, politicians, and sycophants. Elias sat at the head of the table, his eyes dull. He had spent the last 7 hours mediating a petty dispute between 2 aristocrats, just to ensure a minor tax waiver for his business. His days were consumed by endless meetings, shallow networking, and managing the sprawling, bloated beast his life had become. He had manifested wealth, but he felt like a slave. From the shadows of the courtyard, leaning on his familiar cedar cane, Bion emerged. He bypassed the roasted boar and the silver goblets of wine, stopping directly behind Elias's chair. "You look exhausted, boy," Bion whispered. Elias excused himself from the boisterous table and led his old mentor into the quiet sanctuary of his private study. He poured Bion a cup of water. "I have everything I wanted," Elias confessed, rubbing his temples, feeling the throbbing headache of a man spread too thin. "But I have no life left. Every hour is spoken for. Every moment is a negotiation, a dinner, an obligation. I am richer than the governor, yet I feel entirely bankrupt." Rule 3. Guard your time fiercely, the currency of life. "You are bankrupt," Bion stated plainly, taking a sip of the water. "You have traded the most precious, non-renewable resource in the universe for cold, dead metal. You have mastered the manifestation of money, but you have forgotten the philosophy of time." The Stoic philosopher Seneca famously observed that men are fiercely protective of their money, yet they freely hand over their time to anyone who asks. They allow their days to be stolen by idle chatter, useless meetings, and the pursuit of things that do not matter. "Listen to the noise outside," Bion said, pointing toward the banquet hall. "Those people are not your friends. They are thieves. They are stealing hours of your life that you will never, ever get back. You believe you must attend every banquet, please every politician, and oversee every minor transaction to maintain your wealth. This is the illusion of the successful man. Real wealth is not the accumulation of gold. It is the absolute sovereignty over your own time." Bion tapped his cane on Elias's grand marble desk. "If you want to maintain your empire and your sanity, you must learn the most powerful word in the language of success. No, let the minor deals fall through. Let the petty nobles be offended. Delegate the trivial tasks. A man who values his time highly becomes a magnet for real opportunity, because the world respects what is scarce. Right now, Elias, you are too accessible. You are cheapening your own existence." Elias realized that his fear of losing his wealth had turned him into a people-pleaser. He was saying yes out of a scarcity mindset. To truly live as a Stoic, he had to reclaim his hours. He had to understand that time was the only currency that could not be earned back once spent. The next morning, Elias cancelled half of his meetings. He stopped attending the mandatory social gatherings of the elite. He spent his mornings reading, walking, and thinking deeply about strategy, leaving the day-to-day operations to trusted managers. His competitors thought he was growing lazy. In reality, by ruthlessly cutting the trivial, Elias's mind became a sharpened spear. He made fewer decisions, but the ones he made were of such high quality that his profits doubled. He had stopped trading his life for coppers. But a new, insidious fear arose. By stepping back and making massive, high-leverage bets on the market, the risks became astronomical. He was considering buying a fleet of massive war galleons refitted for extreme deep-sea trade to India. The investment required 90% of his liquid wealth. If it failed, he would be thrown back to the docks. The sheer terror of returning to poverty began to paralyze him. He couldn't sleep. The very thought of wearing rough wool and eating stale bread again made his stomach turn. Rule 4. Poverty as a weapon. Voluntary discomfort. Bion found Elias pacing his marble floors at dawn, his face pale with anxiety. "You are a prisoner of your own silk sheets," Bion observed. "You are terrified of the bottom, and so you cling to the middle. This fear will make you a coward in business. To manifest the highest levels of success, you must absolutely destroy the fear of losing it. Bion instructed Elias to do something that sounded entirely mad. For the next 7 days, Bion commanded, you will not sleep in this villa. You will sleep on the dirt floor of a stable. You will wear the torn tunic of a beggar. You will eat nothing but stale bread and drink only warm water. And you will ask yourself, is this the condition that I so deeply feared? This is the Stoic practice of voluntary discomfort. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. The mind creates monstrous fantasies about what failure looks like, paralyzing us from taking the bold risks required for monumental success. Elias obeyed. He left his villa. For a week, he slept on hay that scratched his skin. He ate bread so hard he had to soak it in water to chew it. He shivered in the cold night air. The first 2 days were miserable. He hated it. But by the 4th day, a strange, powerful psychological shift occurred. He realized he was still alive. He could still laugh. He still had his mind, his logic, his breath. The worst-case scenario, the absolute bottom that had been haunting his dreams, was entirely survivable. It wasn't the fiery hell he had imagined. It was just slightly uncomfortable. On the 8th day, Elias returned to his villa, washed, and put on his fine clothes. He sat at his desk, pulled the contract for the Indian fleet toward him, and signed it without a drop of hesitation. The fear was dead. Because he no longer feared the floor, he was free to reach for the stars. By voluntarily experiencing his worst fears, he had immunized himself against them. When a man is not afraid to lose everything, he becomes an unstoppable force in the marketplace. He acts with pure, unadulterated logic rather than emotional self-preservation. Elias's ships sailed for India. He was completely at peace, detached from the outcome, immune to the fear of ruin. The universe, encountering a man devoid of fear and friction, yielded. The ships returned 2 years later, laden with spices and silks that made Elias the wealthiest merchant not just in Alexandria, but in the entire Roman Empire. As Elias's wealth eclipsed the boundaries of normal commerce, he entered a new, far more dangerous arena. He was no longer just a merchant. He was a center of power, and power attracts predators like blood in the water. A coalition of rival trading houses, deeply threatened by Elias's monopoly on the eastern routes, decided to destroy him. They could not beat him in the marketplace, so they aimed for his reputation. They hired scribes to write scathing pamphlets accusing Elias of fraud, of bribing Roman officials, and of exploiting his workers. They paid actors to stand in the city squares and shout vile rumors about his personal life. They petitioned the Roman governor to investigate Elias's accounts, hoping to tie him up in years of expensive, paralyzing legal battles. The assault was relentless, loud, and incredibly public. Elias sat in his study, looking at a stack of defamatory scrolls his managers had collected from the streets. His top lieutenants were in a panic. "We must strike back," his chief accountant urged, his face red with indignation. "We must hire our own criers. We must sue them for slander. We must bribe the governor before they do. If we do not defend your name, the public will believe these lies, and the banks will call in our debts." Elias felt the familiar, hot sting of pride in his chest. His ego screamed at him to crush his enemies, to use his massive wealth to ruin them in retaliation. He reached for his seal, ready to authorize a counterattack that would drain millions of sesterces from his treasury. But then he remembered the circle Bion had drawn in the sand years ago. Rule 5. Build the inner citadel. Seek no validation. Bion, now frail but with eyes as sharp as ever, sat quietly in the corner of the room. He did not need to speak. Elias already knew the Stoic doctrine. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, would later write, "Does an emerald suddenly lose its quality if it is not praised? Does a lie change the fundamental nature of the truth?" Elias lowered his seal. He looked at his panicked lieutenants. "We will do nothing," Elias commanded, his voice cold and steady. The room erupted in protest. "Sir, they are dragging your name through the mud." "My name is not my character," Elias replied, the Stoic armor hardening around his mind. "My character is the inner citadel. It cannot be breached by the words of weak men. If I spend my time, my energy, and my capital fighting shadows, I am allowing them to dictate my actions. I am giving them control. Let them shout. Let them spend their gold on scribes and actors. We will spend our gold on ships and cargo. To manifest and sustain ultimate success, you must become utterly indifferent to the opinions of the mob. If your sense of worth is tied to public validation, you are handing the remote control of your emotions to strangers and enemies. The Stoic builds an inner citadel, an impenetrable fortress of self-awareness. Elias knew he was honest. He knew his ledgers were clean. That was the only reality that mattered. For 6 months, Elias absorbed the slander in total silence. He didn't issue a single denial. He didn't defend himself. He simply continued to execute his business with terrifying precision. The silence drove his enemies mad. They escalated their attacks, spending vast fortunes trying to provoke a reaction. But a fire without oxygen eventually starves. The public grew bored of the one-sided feud. The Roman governor, seeing that Elias's tax payments were immaculate and uninterrupted, threw out the petitions. By ignoring the noise, Elias had forced his rivals to exhaust their own resources. 2 of the rival houses went bankrupt, paying for their smear campaigns, and Elias quietly bought their warehouses for pennies on the dollar. He had defeated them without lifting a sword, using only the crushing weight of his own stoic indifference. But Bion knew that human nature is cyclical, and peace is always an illusion. One evening, as Elias and Bion walked along the balustrades of Elias's magnificent estate overlooking the harbor, Bion pointed to the glittering lights of the vast warehouses below. "It is beautiful," Bion said. "Now, I want you to close your eyes and imagine it all burning to the ground." Elias frowned. "Why would I dwell on such a dark thought? The business is secure. The guards are doubled. Is it not better to focus on positive outcomes? Rule 6, the dark rehearsal, premeditatio malorum. The fool manifests success by believing nothing can go wrong," Bion said, shaking his head. "When disaster inevitably strikes, his mind shatters. The Stoic manifests success by deeply, intimately visualizing the worst possible catastrophes and making peace with them before they arrive. This is the practice of premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. It is the ultimate antidote to complacency." Bion forced Elias to mentally walk through the destruction of his empire. "Imagine a great fire sweeps through the docks tonight. Imagine the Parthians invade from the east and cut off the Silk Roads. Imagine the emperor dies tomorrow, and the new emperor confiscates the wealth of all merchants. Do not just think of it briefly. Feel the loss. Feel the ash in your lungs. Look at your empty hands." Elias closed his eyes and forced himself into the nightmare. He imagined the agonizing smell of burning silk, the panic of the crowds, the total dissolution of his life's work. He felt his heart race. Then, slowly, as he applied the dichotomy of control to the imaginary disaster, his breathing slowed. If it all burned, he would still have his mind. He would still know how to trade. He would start again. Now open your eyes, Bion said. You have survived the disaster in your mind. Because you have looked the worst-case scenario in the eye, you are no longer blinded by optimism. What must you do tomorrow to prepare? The exercise completely shifted Elias's strategy. Modern manifestation gurus preach positive vibes only, but the Stoic knows that blind positivity is a profound vulnerability. By visualizing ruin, Elias became a master architect of resilience. The next day, Elias stopped expanding blindly. He built decentralized stone vaults away from the wooden docks to store his most precious goods. He kept massive cash reserves in diverse currencies. He diversified his supply chain so heavily that no single war or plague could cripple him. 2 years later, the Antonine Plague swept through the Roman Empire. The trade networks completely collapsed. Panic seized the Mediterranean. Merchants who had lived on leverage and blind optimism were annihilated overnight. Warehouses were abandoned. Supply chains snapped. But Elias was ready. He had lived this scenario 100 times in his mind. While the rest of the world panicked, his mind was utterly calm. Because he had stockpiled cash and decentralized his assets, he didn't just survive the plague. He became the central stabilizing pillar of the region's economy. He bought up vital grain ships when no one else had liquidity, ensuring the city did not starve, and in doing so, secured a legacy of wealth and power that would last for generations. He didn't predict the future. He simply inoculated his mind against its darkest possibilities, forcing reality to bend to his preparation. Decades slipped through the hourglass of Alexandria. The young, desperate merchant who had wept on the beach was gone, replaced by a man of iron and silver. Elias was now in his 50s, his hair the color of sea foam, his name synonymous with absolute power across the Mediterranean. He had survived storms, plagues, betrayals, and economic collapses by retreating into the unassailable fortress of his own mind. But there was one enemy no wall could keep out, and no amount of gold could bribe. It was winter when word reached Elias that Bion was dying. The old philosopher had refused to live in Elias's grand estate, choosing instead a modest stone hut on the cliffs overlooking the sea where they had first met. When Elias arrived, the air in the room was thick with the scent of dried herbs and finality. Bion lay on a simple wooden cot, his breathing shallow, his flesh reduced to parchment, stretched over brittle bone. Elias, the richest man in the empire, knelt beside the bed and felt a terrible, heavy helplessness. "I can send for the emperor's physicians," Elias whispered, gripping the old man's frail hand. "I can bring the greatest healers from Persia. I have the gold, Bion. I can buy you time." Bion managed a weak, rattling laugh. "You still think you can bargain with the universe, boy. You cannot buy the sand once it has passed through the glass." Bion slowly turned his head, locking his fading, milky eyes onto Elias. "You have conquered the markets," Bion rasped. "You have conquered your fears, but you haven't conquered the final illusion. You still live as if you have forever. Look at me, Elias. This is your destination. Every ship, every coin, every ounce of silk, it all ends here in a wooden bed, gasping for air. Rule 7. The final urgency, memento mori. Remember you must die, Bion commanded, his voice suddenly sharp, slicing through his own weakness. Memento mori. Most men use death as an excuse to despair. The Stoic uses death as the ultimate tool of focus. If you truly wish to manifest greatness, you must hold the image of your own corpse in your mind every single day. Elias listened, the profound weight of the lesson settling over him. When you realize that your time is strictly limited, Bion continued, you stop hesitating. You stop waiting for the perfect moment to launch the venture. You stop caring about the petty insults of your rivals. Death strips away everything that is fake, leaving only what is absolutely essential. If you want the universe to yield to you, you must act with the ruthless urgency of a dying man. Because, Elias, you are a dying man. We all are. Let the shadow of death be the fire that forges your actions. Bion closed his eyes, his breathing slowing to a faint whisper. Do not mourn me. Just do not waste your remaining sand. He died before the sun set. Elias did not weep. He honored Bion by applying the lesson immediately. He returned to his empire and looked at it through the lens of a corpse. He realized he had been hoarding wealth out of a lingering, subconscious habit of self-preservation. But if he couldn't take it with him, what was the point of a mountain of gold? This realization birthed a massive paradigm shift. Elias stopped seeing his business as a machine for personal extraction and started seeing it as a vital organ of the civilization itself. Rule 8. Lift the whole system. Sympatheia. The Stoics believed in sympatheia, the profound interdependence of all things. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "What brings no benefit to the hive brings no benefit to the bee." Elias understood the true, generational manifestation, the kind that makes a man immortal, is not about taking from the world, but becoming indispensable to it. A parasite eventually kills its host and dies. A symbiote elevates its host and thrives eternally. He stopped hoarding and began to build. Elias poured vast percentages of his wealth into the infrastructure of Alexandria and beyond. When the local aqueducts began to fail, Elias did not wait for the Roman bureaucracy to tax the citizens. He funded the repairs himself. He built immense granaries that stabilized the price of food for the poorest citizens, undercutting his own short-term profits to ensure the city never starved. He established trade schools for orphans, turning the destitute youth of the city into the finest navigators, accountants, and shipwrights in the world. His rivals laughed at him, calling him a bleeding-heart fool who was giving away his empire. But Elias understood the mechanics of the universe better than they did. By enriching the environment around him, he triggered a massive, unforeseen wave of reciprocity. The citizens of Alexandria became fiercely loyal to him. The workers from his trade schools were the most skilled and dedicated in the empire, giving his businesses an unbreakable competitive edge. By stabilizing the city's economy, he created a richer, thriving market that ultimately bought more of his goods. He didn't just manifest wealth for himself, he manifested prosperity for the collective. And the universe, recognizing him as a conduit of growth rather than a stagnant pool of greed, funneled even more resources into his hands. He became untouchable because his survival was now inextricably linked to the survival of the people. 20 years passed. Elias was now a legend, an old man in his 70s, walking the docks of Alexandria with a familiar cedar cane, his presence commanding more respect than a visiting emperor. One brisk autumn morning, a young man, barely 20, pushed past Elias's bodyguards. His clothes were of fine make, but his eyes were wide, frantic, and burning with unearned ambition. He looked exactly like Elias had half a century ago. "Lord Elias!" the young man shouted, panting. "I have read the scrolls. I have studied the market. I want to be exactly like you. I want to manifest a fleet, a fortune, an empire. Tell me the secret. What is the thought, the prayer, the hidden meditation that commands the gold to come to you?" Elias looked at the boy. He saw the impatience, the desire for a shortcut, the belief that success was a magical spell rather than a brutal discipline. Elias led the young man away from the noise of the docks toward a quiet, shaded courtyard. A servant brought them a simple meal, a plate of olives, a block of hard goat cheese, and a pitcher of water. The young man stared at the food in disbelief. "You are the wealthiest man in the known world. You could have a dozen roasted swans stuffed with truffles. You could drink wine older than the empire. Why do you eat like a peasant?" Elias picked up a single olive and ate it slowly. Rule 9. The master of desires, temperance. "Because abundance is a far deadlier poison than poverty," Elias said quietly. "You seek to manifest everything you want. But tell me, boy, if you get everything you want, who controls your soul? You or your desires?" This is the Stoic virtue of temperance. True freedom is not the ability to satisfy every craving. It is the power to have zero cravings. Most men who acquire wealth are immediately enslaved by it, Elias explained, pointing his cane at the sprawling, opulent villas on the hills above them. They buy soft beds, and their bodies grow weak. They drink heavy wine, and their minds grow dull. They require constant entertainment, luxury, and praise. Their wealth becomes a heavy chain around their neck, and they spend the rest of their lives in terror of losing their comforts. Elias poured a cup of water and pushed it toward the young man. "If you want to manifest ultimate power, you must practice strict self-denial, precisely when you do not have to. I eat this cheese and drink this water, so that my body remembers it does not need swans and wine. I fast so that my will remains sharper than my hunger. If you cannot say no to your own base desires, you will never be able to say no to a bad deal, a corrupt politician, or a fleeting emotion. Rule yourself first, or your wealth will rule you." The young man looked down, humbled. The illusion of a glamorous, easy life at the top was shattered. He realized that the man in front of him wasn't great because of what he possessed, but because of what he was willing to reject. "I understand," the young man said quietly. "I must control my mind. I must accept fate. I must remember death. I have the philosophy in my head now. Now I just need to visualize the success. And it will come." Elias slammed his cedar cane against the cobblestones, the sharp crack echoing off the courtyard walls. Rule 10. The brutality of execution. Action over theory. "Visualize," Elias scoffed, his eyes flashing with the fierce fire of his youth. "Do you think the sea cares about your visualizations? Do you think the grain grows because the farmer sat in a circle and meditated upon the wheat?" Elias leaned forward, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "The modern world is sick with a disease of the mind," Elias said. "Men read philosophy. They talk about strategy. They sit in their rooms and manifest by wishing. They believe that thinking deeply is a substitute for bleeding deeply. It is a lie. This is the final, ultimate rule of Stoic manifestation. Epictetus warned his students, "Do not explain your philosophy. Embody it. Stoicism is not a book you read," Elias commanded. "It is a callus on your hand. It is the sweat on your brow when you are working while your rivals sleep. It is the grit in your teeth when the storm has broken your ships, and you must walk into the desert to buy camels. The universe does not reward intention. The universe rewards mass times acceleration. It rewards action." Elias stood up, leaning slightly on his cane. He walked over to a patch of dirt at the edge of the courtyard. With the tip of the cedar cane, he drew a deep, perfect circle in the dirt around the young man. "Your thoughts are inside this circle," Elias said, his voice echoing beyond words from 50 years ago. "They are safe. They are neat. They are entirely useless until you drag them out into the mud of reality. Do you want to manifest everything? Then stop talking about it. Stop studying it. Stop dreaming about it." Elias turned to leave, looking out over the vast, pulsing harbor of Alexandria, the empire he had built not with wishes, but with relentless, disciplined, stoic execution. "Step out of the circle, boy," Elias whispered to the wind, "and get to work." True manifestation isn't about wishing to the universe. It's about forging a mind so disciplined, so resilient, and so focused that the universe has no choice but to yield to your actions. From embracing absolute accountability to executing with the urgency of death, these Stoic rules are the ultimate blueprint for unfailing wealth and power. If this philosophy shifted your perspective today, hit the like button, share this video with someone who needs a wake-up call, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful wisdom. Stop wishing and start building.